Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is Chris Flowers. Here's Dale. I am the executive producer of the Biz Coach Show here with Eric T. Whitmoyer, the founder and CEO of My Biz Coaches. What's going on there, boss?
Good afternoon, Chris. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, my friend. And we are here with Dave McFarland. He is the principal of Focus OPEX. How you doing there, Dave?
I'm doing great today. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing great, man. Thanks for taking time coming on the show today. Really appreciate it. All right, so we're gonna read real quick, and then Eric's gonna do what he does. So Dave is a degreed biologist and has worked for a university laboratory, a private research institute, big pharma, and small biotech. He became an independent business consultant in 2014. He now serves small businesses as a consultant and advisor with focus on manufacturing. He's also searching for a manufacturing company to acquire. Dave is a constant networker and enjoys making good introductions that serve all parties involved.
Awesome. So, Dave, welcome. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I got to ask, you got a degree in biology? Is that what it was? How do you end up buying businesses with a degree in biology?
Yeah, so it was a strange path. So yeah, I actually almost had a PhD in biology. So I was in a PhD program in pharmacology and toxicology when I worked for Big Pharma. And the way it happened was after Big Pharma, I went to work for a biotech startup here in Champaign. And that company was purchased by Sony Corporation. So, a lot of people don't think about Sony biotechnology. There's actually a division of Sony now called Sony Biotechnology. So after we were purchased, Sony really didn't want to be in Champaign, Illinois. So I found myself out of a job, and the last job I had at Sony Biotech was the quality manager. So as the quality manager, well, you kind of deal with manufacturing, right? So the product that's the quality you're looking at. So I got a little bit into it there, and I got into quality system management. And so that's really when I dove into manufacturing. So as a quality systems auditor, you spend a lot of time on factory floors, watching what they do and making sure they're doing it the way they're supposed to be doing it. And so I did that for a number of years. And then I also did consulting at the same time. So in the last 12 years, I've been on about 150 factory floors. So when you spend a lot of time on factory floors, you start to notice patterns, right? So, when things are going right and when things are going wrong. And so as a consultant, that's kind of my space is where I focus, is on the factory floor. And then, somewhere down the line, I thought, as a consultant, usually what happens is you go in and you have some ideas about what's going right, what's going wrong, and you tell them, and you expect them to make the changes. Well, they don't have to. a lot of times they don't. So I thought, well, you know what? If I owned the company, it wouldn't be a discussion. It would just be, hey, I think we should do this. And I own the company, so I think we will do this.
It's going to happen.
So that's the quick story, the evolution to how I got to be a business acquirer.
Interesting. It's funny because I've probably been on 3 factory floors. One was a steel mill factory that I worked in, and I didn't like any of those.
Well, Eric, I was going to ask you the same thing. How do you get a guy who was in field artillery become a business coach, or a guy who was a forward observer for a field artillery unit become a commercial lender? So how did that happen? So
there you go. Well, appreciate that insight, Dave. I know that it's funny when you look at the entrepreneur space, it's not uncommon to see people, start out in one space and kind of gravitate to, it's like, I think it's interesting because I went through this with my children, going to college. What do you want to do? My daughter's going to, she's going to school at the time for, originally she started as poli-sci because she's got a really successful uncle who's a lawyer. And she thought, oh, I'm going to do that. And then she changed to, I convinced her to change to, no. First, she changed to fitness, because she got into fitness competitions. She actually was a amateur fitness competitor. And she thought, I'll do something in that space. I'll do something with dietitian and all that kind of. And then I convinced her to go into marketing because that's kind of what I thought would be a good niche for her. Then she ended up dropping out of school altogether because she got a job in the wireless industry and was making more money than she'd make coming out with any of the degrees that she was looking at. Anyway, I just think it's funny. And so now fast forward, here she is in the marketing space at 32, 10 years later. But I think we kind of find our way. And I think it's interesting, particularly as entrepreneurs, because they don't have school for entrepreneurs. And so I always think it's, I mean, they do now, they have some, but it's not a traditional course per se at most schools. And I think it's kind of an interesting perspective as a business coach. The one thing that I constantly say is like, there's no manual for this. Mm-hmm. Make it up as you go. I don't care what business you're in there. If you do something that's a little bit more formalized, like some kind of franchise, then you have the added benefit of somebody's operational procedures and systems and processes. If you don't, then you're paying somebody like you to come in and say, hey, I noticed your system's not ideal. Let's tweak it. Let's adjust it. I noticed some things that probably aren't working as well as they could. Let's try this. Just like I would do with marketing and sales or something like that with any of my clients.
No, you're exactly right. So, I've kind of reinvented myself several times throughout my career, and I might do it again. Right. So, somebody asked me about that. I was like, you know what? I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm still trying things out. I'm always experimenting. So, and it took me a long time to get comfortable with that because, you have other friends growing up where they already have it planned out. Right. Sure. So they knew when they came out of high school exactly what they were going to do, and they did it and they stuck with it. And God bless them for that. But for me, it was just things would come up. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. I think I'm going to go that way for a while.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did something very similar, so I can totally appreciate it. Well, so I was doing some due diligence on you. I know we got an opportunity to meet a couple of it was about a month and a half ago. For the first time, we had some conversation, but I thought I'd do a little due diligence for you. So I dug into your website, come across a couple of your blogs, thought there were some interesting topics there. And I'm like, all right, I got to ask this guy about this. So I'm just going to read the topics, and then you can I'll let you dive in a little bit. But it's don't improve your processes. That would go completely contrary to what I would talk about with my clients. So I'm curious about that. Don't give volume discounts. Again, that would completely go against some of the suggestions I might make to a client. And I'm taking this out of context for purpose, but don't focus on the margins. That was another good one. I was like, what? And then the last one was don't do more with less, which is absolutely contrary to what I would suggest to somebody particularly in a startup mode or something in that effect. So with that, I'm kind of teeing it up there a little bit. Give us some perspective on some of those articles and what was what kind of plays into that.
Yeah. So the idea behind the titles of the blogs, they're supposed to be a little bit provocative and counterintuitive. Right. But then, when I get into the blog, what I'm trying to do is show the logic behind it, because a lot of it, it's based on false assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, I don't remember the four you said. So pick one again, and I'll give you a little.
Yeah, one was the processes. Another one that stuck out.
Don't improve the process. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What I mean by that is what you usually see, and this is it's really baked into like lean manufacturing technology, right? Is continuous improvement. Right.
Yep.
And that continuous improvement is about improving your processes. Right. So the approach that usually happens is, okay, we have to improve our processes. So we're going to improve them all at the same time, all at once. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the first problem. Right. So now you're distributing your focus across a bunch of things, and that's problematic. So what I would say is what you do instead, and this is why my company is called Focus OPEX. The first thing you want to do is focus. Which process is in the worst shape and which one's killing us? Let's focus there, right? So don't improve processes. Start with the one that's killing you, right? And then what you'll find sometimes, if I improve that one process, I don't have to improve the other ones anymore because we just got a 90% improvement from improving that one. And in fact, sometimes improving other processes don't improve the system. And that's the other part of it. Don't improve your processes, improve your system.
Yes.
So only improve the processes if they're going to give a system improvement. If they're not, it's a waste of time at best, and it actually may be counterproductive to the system overall, right? That's the focus of that blog.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that. So how about the margins one? Because that was that kind of stuck out to me.
I'm sure Eric's head about came off on that one.
Right.
Like, whoa, what?
So this one's a little trickier to explain, but I'll attempt it. So this is based on a principle in theory of constraints. So in theory of constraints, they have this model that they talk about, and they say, okay, if you do the traditional model and you look at your margins, you will pick X product mix, right? And then they do an experiment. They say, okay, we use the traditional way of looking at using cost accounting, and we pick this product mix. And then they say, okay, so if we pick that product mix, we can make X number of this product and X number of that product. Let's say it's a very simple factoring. You only make 2 products. And if we do that, what happens? Oh, we lost money. How does that happen? We picked the highest product margin product to make. And so again, what it's relying on is a false assumption. And what you find out is when you dig into that, if you look at your factory, most factories have like 1 or 2 most constrained resources, right? And so what it says is, instead of focusing on margins, you should focus on how much time does this take on your most constrained resource, right? And it has nothing to do with the margin. What it has to do is throughput, right?
Yes, totally.
So if your higher margin item takes up more time on your most constrained resource, you can't make as many of them, right?
Yep.
So you're better off selling more low margin products than fewer high margin products. And if you don't take that into consideration, you might put your company out of business.
Yeah, great point. And ironically, as much as you're referencing that as it relates to a production facility, that plays out in the service-based industry as well, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a great. I appreciate you taking the time to share that, because I thought that was. I knew that the titles were written in a way to be provocative and kind of draw your attention. But I'm like, okay, wait a minute. And I didn't have time to read the whole article. So I'm like, all right, Dave's going to explain this because I need to understand this. But yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, and great perspective, because I think that there's always these, and this is where I get really frustrated with other coaches. There's these always, you always do this. And I'm like, don't always do anything. Every business is relatively different in some regard or another. And you really have to understand, it's not to say that there aren't certain tried and true practices that work most of the time, but that's most of the time, not always. And when I hear these superlatives, I'm like, that always kind of makes the hair on my back of my neck stand up. I'm like, it doesn't work like that all the time. There are certain things that are not right standard practice, and you really need to understand that particular business in more detail, because I've seen a lot of coaches, it's the square peg in the round hole analogy. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it this way. And then that way I can assure, it's like I'm following the same process, and there's some value in that for certain, right? To your point about processes. But when you do that with everything, then it creates some, in my eyes, it creates some false assumptions, as you referenced earlier, right? And you take things for granted, and now you can't figure out why something's not working. So appreciate that. Great dialogue. So let's talk a little bit more about one of the things you had me jump into was a call that you were conducting, and it was talking about consulting for equity, I believe was the term, right?
Yeah.
And in the consulting for equity, I've seen it. I know we referenced a couple of different people that we've either followed or seen. I know Walker Diebel, his book on Buy Then Build was one of the ones that really kind of keyed me into. It wasn't the first one I had seen, but it was the one that was probably most, in my eyes, probably one of the better written books with the concepts of acquisition as a growth strategy, or even a startup strategy for that matter. And just to lay some data to this, because I've done some research as I'm writing the book that I'm putting together. The number of businesses that fail is relatively high, right?
Yeah.
Percentage, and generally speaking, it's about 25% failure rate within the first year, 50% within 5 years, 75% within 10 years. And those have been consistent, give or take 3 to 5%. For the last 45 years, those numbers are accurate. That's how far back I went. So you're looking at 45 years. We've been pretty consistent that the failure rates are pretty high. Now that's of all businesses, but ironically, when you go and you look at either a franchise operation or a business that's been acquired, failure rates are dramatically reduced. Right. And so I'm sure I'm not sharing anything you're not familiar with. Right. And obviously, as it relates to franchise, I think that the obvious reason is that you've got proven processes and systems. And now that's not across all franchises either, but certain brands bring a really strong breadth of what I want to say, exposure, right? Name brand recognition. That brand recognition is really, in one of my eyes, when you buy a franchise, the main thing you're paying for. The operations are fine, but the brand recognition is the thing. I want people showing up at my door, depending on my retail, my model, especially if it's a retail model, a restaurant, a retail storefront, something like that. We were in the wireless industry for 23 years. When I went from Alltel to T-Mobile, it was like we tripled the amount of traffic. And it was like within 90 days, they tripled the amount of traffic. So when you do a franchise, it totally makes sense. Now, acquisition, whole nother story, right? But you're buying an established model, theoretically with profits built in. And if done correctly, particularly if you're using SBA loan, you're buying with profits and with enough money to pay off the debt that you take on. So there's an acquisition strategy there, and there's a lot of value for people looking in that space. Now, I bring all that up to kind of say, okay, so coaching for equity is a whole nother conversation that I think relates to both of those topics. And I'm kind of curious if you wouldn't, first of all, just kind of give us your perspective on that and kind of how you position yourself in that space.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is the reason I'm really promoting consulting for equity is because a lot of consultants die poor. Right. And so I had a conversation with a very prominent consultant, and he was telling me it was, a problem that he observed. It's like, Dave, I know a lot of consultants, and some of them have delivered billions with a B, billions of dollars of value for companies, and they just got paid, an hourly fee or something, and they don't really have much to show for it. So that the first thing is, I think that's really unfair. If you're delivering that much value, you should get a piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think it's unfair to tell someone, whatever I deliver to you, I should get 10% of it. That's a fair deal, right? So whether I'm delivering $100,000 in value or $1 billion in value, 10% is a fair price to pay for that. So, but most consultants don't do that, right? So they even when I started out as a consultant, I did what they call the dollars for hours trap, right? So I come up with a day rate or a dollar rate, and I charged it just because I thought that's what everybody else did. And most consultants still do that. Mm-hmm. I really don't like that model. I think that you should have a model where you at least get paid for the value. And so I moved to that model years ago, and it wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard to say, you know what, the last time we engaged, I had this hourly rate. I don't do that anymore. So I'm going to work with you for, X number of days, X number of months. And I think I'm going to deliver X value. So this is what I'm going to charge you. Right. And I try to give people a 10X return that way. Right. So that's one thing. But then on top of that, you're like, okay, well, if I'm working with a company, especially if it's a small private company, I think I'm going to deliver tremendous value to you if I work with you for a number of years. And I think I should have the opportunity to get paid for that in a way that's meaningful. And that would be through an equity arrangement. Mm-hmm. And I found it wasn't as hard to sell as I thought it would be. And one of the key things that I think helps when you make that sale is to tell them, okay, yeah, it's a long-term arrangement. So we're talking 3 to 5 years in some cases, right?
Right.
And so the first thing that they might say is, well, Dave, geez, 3 to 5 years, I'm not sure I can deal with having you around for that long. And so what you have to convince them, it's a feature, not a bug. Right. Well, if I'm going to deliver the type of value I think I can, you should want me around forever.
Right.
right? So I think if you do it that way, you can sell it. And then again, I don't do this to take advantage of companies. In fact, the reason I want to get into a consultant for equity deal with them is because I want to become their partner, right?
Right. Yep.
I like your business. I want to be a part of it, and I want to work alongside of you. And the way to be a real partner is to take an equity position with you. And again, it's not. I'm not trying to take advantage of them. I don't ask for an equity position unless I'm going to deliver really transformational value to them. So I'm not talking, oh, I'm gonna increase your sales by 20% next year. Nope, not good enough. Over 3 to 5 years, we're gonna 2x, 3x, 5x, maybe even 10x your top or bottom line. Those are the types of deals you need to make, to me, to make it worthwhile asking for equity.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's funny as you mentioned that, because I've negotiated 2 deals positively or effectively, and probably proposed it to 8 companies, 8 clients. So I'm 2 out of 8. And in those scenarios, it was the discussion point was, wow, that's a big commitment, right? That was very much the stopgap. Yeah. And it was funny because the call that I listened in on, I heard you reference that in that conversation with somebody asked the question about it. And I was like, oh, that was a really interesting position, the way you set it up. And I'm like, I wish I had heard that before I'd had a couple of those conversations. I might have closed a few more. But I think that that's an interesting point. And I think one of the things that was most compelling to me, and it wasn't something that was lost on me, but when you mentioned it, it was like, and I think part of it was when the first times I tried to position myself to do that, I was very early on in my consulting. And so I was probably less confident of all the different ways I could help a business owner. In the beginning, when I started, I was pretty much focused on sales. And then I recognized, well, many of these owners don't have the leadership development skill sets that I have. Or maybe it was the, marketing strategy or whatever. So I recognized all of a sudden, I'm like, I have a lot. And then I spent a ton of time learning about marketing on LinkedIn or, some of the social media. And so all of a sudden I realized, well, I've got a lot of value here, a lot more than I had really anticipated. Then there's the whole my accounting background and finance background. That was valuable. So I'm like, and then there's the practical application of a comparable business model. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, just about anywhere I walk into, I can actually bring a 3, 5, 10x, depending on how big they currently are and the impact they would have. But the thing that you said was, you should want me to have a position like that, because now I'm committed to your success. If you're paying me $3,000 a month, $5,000 a month, or whatever that is for a consulting fee for me to come in and play whatever role I play for however long I played for, the truth of the matter is I don't have any vested interest in seeing you grow. But if I know that there's a stake that I'm going to benefit from over the next 3 years, and I'm going to have an impact in that to the degree that I'm able to help you grow the business, man, that's pretty meaningful. And that I think that goes a long way. But most people, really struggle with those conversations, which was evident to me from the call that you had me listen into, because that was, I could see that. I struggle with that too.
Yeah, and the other point I made there that I'd like to make here is that it doesn't have to just be you, right? So every engagement every engagement I go into, I know my little piece about how to improve things in the factory, but I really believe once I get in the door, I can solve any problem they have. And it's not because I'm the smartest guy in the room and I know everything about everything. It's because I have a really good network of professionals and I can bring them in to help me. And so if you can get in the door with any skill, as long as you can recognize those problems and you can help them bring a resource in to fix it, you can do consulting for equity.
Yeah. It's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. Because to your point, you probably have enough people in your back pocket that you can reach out to and say, hey, fractional CFO guy, fractional COO guy, they have some opportunities here. I'd love for you to come in and contribute, right? And then you can negotiate that deal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. So let me ask you this: valuing your consultant's contribution. How do you determine that value? How do you said 10%? Is it always 10%? Does it vary? What are some of the things that you might consider in that when you come up with that number?
Yeah, I really look to do a 10x, right? So sometimes it's partly my perception, but I also try to get it out of the other person. So I say, okay, if I did this, what would that be worth to you? Right.
Yeah, great positioning.
And so have those conversations. The other thing that can't be overlooked, it's not always just about the money. So what can you do for that person personally? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about the numbers, but also say, okay, if we did this, what would that do for you professionally? How would that move you forward in the organization? That has value too. Right. And even if it's a little less, it's a little more squishy to come up with that number, that still is part of the calculus. And so don't leave that out. But I really do try to come up with a number. So for instance, sometimes it's hypotheticals. Like I had an opportunity with a company recently where we were going to grow their user base, right? And so I thought I had some good ideas how I could leverage my network to grow their user base. And so we just did a calculation. All right, so we're gonna assume each user is gonna spend this much money a year, stick around for this many years, right? So you can come up with a number. And so I'm going to say, okay, if I give you 1,000 users and we think their lifetime value is $1,000 each, 1,000 times 1,000 is $1 million. So if I deliver those 1,000, I'm telling you that's worth $1 million. So then I should be able to charge 100,000 to do that, right? It doesn't have to be complicated math.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. One of the other questions on there was the agreement itself. Do you have a templated agreement that you typically use that you share with some of the people you work with? Or
I do have a template, but it changes a lot. So what's template is the specific sections, but the language is going to vary dramatically depending on the engagement. But one thing I really like to put in there, even if it's a consulting for equity agreement, is options, right? So different levels of options. And so for instance, I might be okay doing an agreement with them that isn't consulting for equity, although I'd really like the consulting for equity. So you might put in other options that are that cost less, but you do less, right? So as the cost goes up, the value you're delivering also goes up. But sometimes that's easy to do it. And, you can play on human psychology a little bit here too. So if you really want them to take the middle option, you can make the low option and the high option. You can frame it in such a way that it really drives them towards the value of the middle option. So, and I've had people say, well, Dave, that seems a little deceitful. It's like, no, it's not really deceitful because each option is valuable to them.
Right.
But I think that this middle one is really what they need. So I'm not trying to trick them. What I'm trying to do is have them realize that that's the best option.
Yeah, absolutely. We similarly, we pretty much lead with every proposal, whether it's more of a custom proposal for a higher ticket client or a standard proposal for a basic coaching program. Everything gets presented with a done do it yourself, done with you, done for you kind of strategy, right? And the done for yous are pretty premium price because we're going to bring in resources that are going to do the work for you and on your behalf. Because we run in so many clients that don't have the bandwidth or don't have the skill set inherently within the organization to do what needs to be done for whatever implementation or whatever the case may be. So there's a premium price to that. But generally, we want people to go with the middle one, which is the done with you. We're going to show you how to do it and lead you through that process because it scales better, right? A done for you it requires me to bring in the resources.
Right.
And the do it yourself, unfortunately, I don't think we get enough results from that. I think people take it on, they'll be like, oh yeah, great. And then they just never follow through on it. And so it's not necessarily something I want to offer, but I put it there because some people are cost conscious, or, they legitimately don't have the resources, but they need the solution. And so we make it available to them. So consequently, I do the same thing. The consulting for equity piece. So let me ask you this: when you do that, do you typically still take some kind of stipend when you do the consulting piece or the equity piece? Sorry.
Yeah, generally the way I like to do it is I like to use something called phantom equity. So it's not really a stock. So it's generally I do a monthly retainer fee, right, of a set amount, and then I like to do an earn in for the equity. So if they would give it to me up front, I'd take it. But usually, especially if you don't have a really strong relationship with them, you have to earn that equity by hitting certain milestones, right? So I will say, okay, we're going to work together. I'm going to do this stuff, and you're going to pay me this amount a month, right? Now, once I earn into that equity, then we're going to compare your monthly profit against my equity stake, right? And if it's more than my monthly retainer, you're going to pay me that instead, right? So it's the monthly retainer or the profit sharing piece, whichever's higher, right?
Right.
And so the idea is if I do well, then my monthly salary actually goes up over time, right?
Right.
And then the third piece is what I call the equity kicker, or the exit kicker. So what that means is, let's say I do an earn in and I get a 10% profit sharing. So now that 10% is also means if you sell the company, I get 10% of the proceeds, because that's my stake. So that's why it's called phantom equity. So it's like you're getting a dividend as a shareholder, and you're getting the payout like you're a shareholder without actually being a shareholder. And so the advantage of doing that is if you get an equity stake given to you, you're not getting money, but you're getting taxed. And so for a lot of people, they don't like that, right? I don't want to have to pay taxes on money I'm not actually getting. So the phantom equity, basically you just get money and then you just get taxed as income. And then on the exit, it would be the same in either direction, but the taxing would be different. So if you truly get stock, that's probably better from a tax situation, right? Because when you sell, it would be like a capital gains tax. Whereas if you do it this way, it's probably just going to be treated as income. Talk to your tax attorney, but generally speaking, that's probably the way it would work. So there's pluses and minuses to either way, and it probably also depends on who you're working with. So if it's a public held company, they're probably going to be more likely to just issue you stock grants, right? But a small privately held company, that actually might make them nervous. They might actually prefer the profit share. So it kind of depends on the client as well.
Yeah, agreed. Great point. Quick question on the as you bring that up in regards to do you ever do an early buyout clause?
Always.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So there would be a what we call a put option in there, right? So and it could even be in both directions. So at a minimum, I'm going to put in a put clause to say, we're going to work together, and then after my equity stake kicks in, anytime after that, if I want to exit, you have to buy my stake, and then I usually also throw them a bone and say, well, if I force that, then I have to pay for a third party valuation of your company. And then that's what it would be worth. Right. The last time I did this, it went both directions. So the company said, well, if you get one of those, I should have one too. Meaning if I give you an equity stake and I decide later I want to claw it back, I should have the option to do that. And so I agreed. I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll do that.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. It's great insight. And it made me think of that, because I'm sure just like anything else, right? Not every deal is made to last forever. So
right. And that's important because, sometimes you're working with a company that's struggling, right? And so what they really want to do is like, Dave, we just need to get it up to here so we can sell it. We're tired. We're done. Right. What sometimes happens is, okay, you get it going and wow, it really grew. It's humming along. They're like, Dave, I like it now. I don't want to sell it.
Yeah.
Right. So you might still want to leave after 3 to 5 years. Maybe it's really, humming along on its own and doesn't need you as much anymore. And maybe you have other things that you want to do with your money and your time so that you would want to take an exit.
Yeah. Agreed. Interesting you mentioned that, because about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, actually, created a program. We created a program, My Biz Coaches, which was it's exit strategy planning. So, you're getting ready to sell. Okay, let's talk through this. Here's 5 key things you need to make sure that you're ready for before you even think about selling it, right? Which unfortunately doesn't usually happen. Usually they've already made a decision to sell. And I'm like, okay, well, either you need to put that on hold for like 18 to 36 months, or you need to be willing to let it go for a lot less than what you anticipated. Right. And so, but we have that conversation, and I'm like, we really need to work in an equity kicker on this, because the amount of time and energy we're going to put in, we should be taking them from a 2x, 2.5x, 3x multiple to a 4 or 5x multiple, which is pretty significant. If you're getting $500,000, you're selling them, you got $500,000 in EBITDA, and you take that up to $750,000 and increase the multiple to 4 or 5, or you get it to $1 million or EBITDA. That's pretty substantial. So it's a lot of work to do that too. Even with a decent ticket, you're still looking at a lot of commitment to put into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A couple of questions. Legal, financial considerations. You referenced some of the financial ones. Any particular legal considerations that you kind of work through with this in regards to things you might want to make sure are in your agreement, or something to that effect, to help ensure that you don't get anybody taking advantage of you?
So I think the put option's a big one.
Yeah.
And then it be very clear, if you're doing an earn-in, be very clear what that target is, right? Don't make that wishy-washy, right?
Yeah.
And especially if like if the earn-in target is based on profit, it would serve you well to put in some language about what profit means, right? Because is that net profit? Is it gross profit?
Yeah, great point.
Is it? Do we discount unexpected earnings that come in? Like they sold a property or something. So make it clear as well as you can what profit means. Or another way to do that is to, again, have a third party do these calculations. But have some guidelines. And the reason I say that is because, to your point, you have to protect yourself. So, right. I try to always be ethical in my dealings. Not everyone feels the same. And so you have to protect yourself. And especially with profit, it's really easy to manipulate. Revenue, not so much, right? If it's a revenue number, that's pretty hard to hide that they have revenue. Profit, if you get your accountant, they can massage the numbers. In fact, if you have an accountant doing your taxes, they'll tell you, okay, well, do you want to make profit, or do you want to pay no taxes?
Right.
So they can arrange things one way or the other to adjust the profit. So that's probably the one that you have to be careful about the most.
Yeah.
But any contingencies that you want to put in, or that you want to think about, put them in the contract. So especially that put exit clause, if you don't have that in there, they may not let you out. Right. If you decide later. Right. So you have to put it in there. The only other comment I'll make about the legal is you don't necessarily have to have a lawyer write this, right? So my proposals are just written in common language. I write them myself. I don't write a contract in the traditional sense. And I do that for 2 reasons. One is I don't want to pay a lawyer to do these every time, because they're always a little bit different. And secondly, I don't want the party on the other side to then take it to their lawyer, which is going to change it and give it back to me. And then you got all this back and forth. So if you're working with small companies, family-owned companies like I do, they actually appreciate the common language in it. And it's still enforceable as long as you say that this is a proposal and agreement and have that language in there, and you sign it and date it. If you do all of that stuff, it's still a binding contract, even if it's not written by a lawyer.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, great point. And I think the big thing is helping people identify what are the tripping points that you want to factor in before you get into that, because that's where it happens, to your point. So what kind of role at Focus OPEX do you play? Do you help people facilitate these negotiations? Do you I know, like I said, I know the call that I set in, you were kind of introducing this as an idea to some people. Do you, and I think you're actually creating a program, or at least a group, to help facilitate more people to adopt this as a strategy in their consulting processes. You would talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say, at Focus OPEX, I'm everything. So I am a solopreneur. So
Right.
Focus OPEX is my consulting company, and I do a lot of stuff under that name. And then the consulting for equity is, I had someone ask me about it. They said, Dave, have you ever considered teaching people about this, like as a mentorship program? And I hadn't, but I thought about it a little bit. And so that is something I'm working on right now. So yeah, throughout February, I'm doing free seminars every Wednesday evening to tell people about this. And that's the recording that you saw. And then the plan is, if we get enough interest, then we're going to have basically a working group that will get together, 2 to 4 times a month. We still have to work that out. But the idea is that other consultants that want to do this, we're going to get them in the room, teach them some things, talk through real problems, and basically just help each other get deals done.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's a great concept. I remember you referenced it. That's why I wanted to bring it up in the call that I was on. And I think what I really like about that is twofold. One, you've done these deals at least enough times to feel comfortable to kind of share your thoughts and ideas with others. And I think there's always that added advantage of bringing some smart people together and putting them in the same room and saying, hey, this is what I struggled with. Hey, this is what I struggled with. This is how I dealt with it. And all of a sudden you get some really good synergies coming out of that. And you take somebody like yourself who's done it a handful of times, maybe, I don't know how many times you've actually done it, but then you're kind of leading others through that conversation. There's a lot of value in that. And I think a lot of other consultants would benefit from that, because to your point, the average consultant does retire, or at least die. Would you say die broke?
Yeah. And the way I'm approaching this too is that I'm not going to this room to just spout things at people and say, this is the way you should do it. I'm going to learn stuff too. So there are going to be people in the room that are going to teach me stuff. So it's really just a way to help each other. And I'm kind of the facilitator. That's the way I look at it. So yeah, I'll share something each meeting, a little lesson, something I've learned. But the idea is, as the group, is we're going to help each other get through real challenges and help each other get work done. Yeah. Yeah.
I love the strategy. So let me ask you this: what's a good consideration? You say consultant, like with the fractional CXO group. Does that make sense for that category, for somebody for your space?
Absolutely. Yeah. Fractional CFOs, COOs, CEOs, whatever fractional you are. Like I said, to me, you could be a hairdresser and do consulting for equity. Seriously, if you can get yourself in the door and discover their problems, as long as you can create a team that can solve those problems, you can do the consulting for equity. I'll tell you an interesting story. One that it was an opportunity that came my way. It didn't pan out, but it was still valid. I knew a group that did turnarounds, right? And so that's what they do. They charge like $12,000 or $15,000 a month, but they really, really turn a company around. One that's dying, and they can make it profitable. And they're not interested in equity at all. They just want the payment. So I had a company that I thought was a good target for them. And so I approached that company. I said, okay, you're hurting. I think you need help. And it's not just one person's help. There's a lot of things wrong here. I think you really need a team. I have this great team that can come in and fix every problem you have. And it's going to cost this much a month. And then I'd also like to get an equity stake in the company if we meet targets, right? So I could pitch that to the owner, and I have both that payment and the equity stake, right? And so the deal was, if it went through, is that I would get the equity stake, they would get the payment, and I would do nothing except I just arranged the deal. That's fair too, right? So again, people will say, well, Dave, that sounds like you're taking advantage of the company. I said, no, actually, I'm doing what I would normally do, right? I approach, we assess, we bring in resources, the resources get paid, and if we make our targets, there's an equity distribution. So the only difference is I wasn't getting the monthly retainer, they were. So that means that I got the whole equity stake. And that's a really interesting arrangement. And I think anyone could do that as long as they find the target and they can put the deal together.
Yeah, that's the broker arrangement, really. I mean, that's you're bringing the deal together, right? That's in just about any business model that's worth 2%, 2 to 5%, depending on the size of the deal, right? Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's great insight. When is there ever a time that the consulting for equity doesn't make sense?
Yes, there is. So I don't think it makes sense if it's really a company that's looking for a Hail Mary. If they're really circling the drain, and the only reason they're offering you equity is because they can't pay for it and they feel they have nothing to lose, right? Well, you're taking all the risk there. I don't think that's a good deal for either side, honestly. And then for me personally, I don't like to do this model with startups. So a lot of startups will again throw equity around because they don't have money. And the reason I don't like that is because first of all, I discourage startup companies from giving away too much equity. So I just don't think that's good for them to do because they're giving it to a lot of people. And then the second thing is there's a really good chance, because you mentioned the statistics at the beginning, right? There's a really good chance they're not going to make it. Right. So that means there's a really good chance you won't get your equity payout. So I don't think that's a good arrangement either for me personally. I know other people that do that almost exclusively and they love it. And it's their ideas that, well, most of them fail, but one of them is going to be a home run. Okay. If that's the way you want to play it, that's there's nothing wrong with it. That's just not the way I like to do it. Right. Not that I won't work with startups, but if I work with a startup, I would probably want to just get paid a little bit. And if they give me equity, basically it's almost like I'm thinking it's a pro bono deal. Right. Yeah. So I want to help them, but you know what? I'm not thinking I'm going to make money off this, but I kind of like what they're doing. I like their product. I want them to succeed. So I would kind of look at it almost like a pro bono deal. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think I have like 2.5% in a company that maybe someday. That's the other thing too, right? If you do a startup, you might have your money locked up for 20 years. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. As I said, they're still around. I worked with them 2.5 years ago for 1.5 years. And so I've been in business for 5.5 years. Yeah, maybe someday it'll pay off. But yeah, great point. And I think that both of those would be ones that I would certainly shy away from. Certainly the struggling organization, not struggling, but like definitely Hail Mary kind of. I think that's the right word or terminology for that analogy. So how do you see this? Just out of curiosity, because there are not a lot of people doing this. Not a lot of people are consulting for. I know it's growing. And I'm kind of curious. I obviously referenced. I didn't reference him, but Carl Allen's one of the people that I follow that promotes this. I've heard 2 or 3 others that kind of reference the idea, the concept of consulting for equity. They're trying to make money on selling the concept to somebody. But I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If somebody's willing to pay for it. But at the end of the day, where do you see this longer term? Do you see this as a real do you think more consultants can really capitalize on this and really leverage it for their growth strategy long term? I do, and I'm promoting it, right? So I'm really trying to get more people to do this. The way I got into it was through the investment angle, right? So I learned about this through investment communities, and so what the idea was that you don't have to have the whole company. Right. And so by doing consulting for equity, you can get in and get a piece of the company, and that can be very good for you. Also, as an investor, if you if you work with a company for 3 to 5 years and you get an equity stake and they do want to sell, you might be the buyer, right? So it gives you an inside track on them, because you know what? If I've worked for the company for 5 years, I don't need to do due diligence anymore.
No.
It's been done. I know
Right.
all of their skeletons, right?
Right.
So it's a great way to get in the door. So plus the other way around. So the way that I got my last consulting for equity deal was I went to them as an investor to talk about an acquisition. And I kind of talked them out of the acquisition because I didn't think they were ready. And I said, let's do this instead. And then in 3 to 5 years, if you still want to sell, let's talk. But I think this is going to be a better deal for both of us if we grow the business a bit. So yeah, I really encourage, like I said, any consultant or any coach, fractional, if you're delivering great value to the company, there's no reason not to do this.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I might have shared a little bit about my master plan with the My Biz Coaches brand and the model. In longer term, the more coaches we have, the more clients we have, the more access to deals. And so that's I think there's a big piece there. I'm very much a proponent of that, and getting some better understanding around how to structure a deal effectively, and more effectively how to sell the deal or convince the individual. So with that, there was one last piece I wanted to touch on, because I know you referenced it, which is you're still looking to buy a business. Tell us a little bit about what are you looking for?
Yeah, so for me, I am looking for a small business. So my definition is 3 to 10 million in revenue, and the rationale there is if you buy a business that's below 3 million in revenue, you're more or less buying a job instead of a business, right? So their founder and operator is doing a lot of it, and you might be the one doing that in their place. And then if you get above 10 million, you start to bump up against private equity, and that number is even coming down. Private equity has so much money. They're looking for smaller deals all the time, and they'll even buy sub-$1 million businesses as bolt-ons to current businesses. So you're already competing with them a little bit. But there's a ridiculous number of businesses out there that you can buy. I personally don't use business brokers. I'm trying to do off-market deals, and so you can find deals with a broker, but that's only a fraction of the potential businesses out there. The other reason I like this is because these businesses need buyers, right? So you heard above the what do they call it, the silver tsunami? All the baby boomers aging out and wanting to leave. And the thing is, they need help, but they don't know it.
Right.
I have had a lot of conversations. So I've been searching since January of 24. I've had a lot of conversations, but I haven't gotten the business yet, because most of the businesses I talk to that say they're ready to sell aren't ready.
Yeah.
They have lots of problems that you alluded to, and it's going to take them, in a lot of cases, 3 years to get them in a shape that they can sell. And so I think that's a big problem that provides a lot of opportunity for consultants that want to work with them. Because to me, that's a really big value you can deliver, is if you can get them ready to sell in 3 years, right?
Yep.
So I think that's a great thing to do. I got a little off target on my answer, but so yeah, 3 to 10 million in revenue is what I'm looking for. And I like component makers, contract manufacturers. So if they make parts out of metal, plastics, or electronics, that's kind of my sweet spot.
Nice. Okay. Appreciate that. We'll make a note of that and see if we can help you find something like that. Interesting. As you kind of going back to the comments that you made in regards to the silver tsunami and the number of businesses that you, just ballpark, how many businesses you think you've taken a decent look at in the last year?
Upwards of 20.
Wow. In a year.
Yeah. And for other folks, I know that's actually a small number. So
sure. Yeah.
The folks that have been doing this for a while, they're their number's pretty pessimistic. They say that I'm probably going to have to look at 100 before I find one.
I was actually going to ask you, because my that's the number I've heard, and to really kind of nail it down, 100 gets you 10 to look at really deeply. 10 gets you 3 that you maybe put an offer in. 1 gets you a close. I think it was actually in Walker's book, Built to Sell, that was the kind of analogy he used the metrics that he used to kind of narrow it down. Interesting perspective, because and I think one of the things that you mentioned, you didn't outright say it, and I want to say it because I think it's valuable. If you're looking at doing consulting for equity, working with these senior businesses, people of the baby boomer age that are looking to exit, and you can come in and in a 3-year span of time help prep them to go from that, because most of those businesses, when they're in the position that you referenced, they're not ready yet. They're looking at maybe a 2.5x multiple. And just by doing a few things over the course of a couple of years, and it does take a couple of years because you have to, finances, books are one of the things that are usually not good. But if you can get them cleaned up over the next 2 years and show them the way they should be shown, as well as, have a leader in place and things like that. If you can do that over the course of 2, maybe 3 years, and you go from a 2x or a 2.5x to a 4x or a 5x while increasing profits at the same time, that's pretty meaningful to the owner that's selling.
Right.
And you could get a piece of that when they sell, because you're already walking into an exit strategy. You're leading them to the exit strategy. So if there's a target audience that's ripe for the opportunity for consulting for equity, it's somebody who's 2 or 3 years from selling, right? I mean, that's 3 to 5 max, right? And because they already identified that they're ready to sell or looking to sell, you just need to make sure that they're prepared to sell and help you get the most value out of it. And you get a nice piece of some equity piece out of that when they do it, knowing full well what the end line looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been great, Dave. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to share before we cut out for the day?
So I just want to reiterate what you just said about the things wrong with the business, right? So if you're a business owner and you've never thought about an exit plan or transitioning, start thinking about it and expect that it's going to take 3 to 5 years to be ready, because if you've never sold a business, it's like nothing else you've sold, right?
Yeah.
It's different than selling your car or your home or anything, right? There's a lot involved, and there are questions to ask that you haven't considered. So reach out to someone that you can help you answer some of those questions.
Yeah, great point. And I would add, and this is not a knock on the business brokerage space. As a matter of fact, just 2 weeks ago, I had a business broker on here. But don't just interview a business broker about selling your business. Talk to a financial planner. Talk to somebody, some kind of legal representative. Talk to a consultant, and get 3 or 4 or 5 different perspectives, because they all have their version of what that experience is going to look like based on what they've been involved in.
Right.
I've seen those deals. I've personally bought and sold businesses. I've been on deals that when they were sold, I've seen that side of it. I also, like I said, if you had a CFO who's been through some buy sell deals, they have their perspective, what they look at and what they'd be looking for. A financial planner would be telling you, hey, you may not want a lump sum buyout. That sounds great, but from a tax consequence perspective, depending on your situation, may not make as much sense. So don't just go to the broker and say, hey, I want to sell my business. Hopefully the broker is a really good broker and has really good contacts and has done enough deals to guide you. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't have that much experience, and so they can't really guide you in that way. And I think that, to your point, Dave, I think there's a lot of people like you and I who've been involved in deals like that, where we can help guide that client through that experience a little bit more than just one perspective. Because the broker's got a vested interest in selling that business, regardless of what you sell the business for. Yes, they want to get the most out of it, but they don't have the resources to help you maximize it necessarily.
Yeah, I want to add one more point to that if I can. Yeah. So I know an exit planner, and he's identified a list of 20 service providers that most businesses need to talk to on their exit journey. So think about
awesome.
that for a second.
Yeah. And then you, as you mentioned, there's a lot of questions that you need to answer that you've not even considered yet, right? And I'm sure that's embedded in that list of 20 different vendors you probably need to talk to. Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been amazing, David. I really appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for being on the show today, and we'll look forward to catching up with you sometime in the near future.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Yeah, maybe we can celebrate when you actually acquire your business.
Sounds great.
Thanks again.